Welcome to Demming Chronicles, where we focus on issues that are current and trending. We bring you the ideas behind those topical issues. We interview persons who have a different point of view. Our aim is to change the conversation. We nudge the conversation in a direction that will make a difference to our society. On today's program, we have two interesting guests. We have Derrick Lewis, who has made his name as a Carnival person, but as an entrepreneur and as a game changer. Derrick is going to be talking about Carnival and what the possibilities are for 2021. Our second guest is Gary Aboud, who is an environmentalist and who focuses on the biggest challenges to face the Caribbean with regard to environmental sustainability. We'll be back shortly. Welcome to Demming Chronicles, and our guest today is Gary Aboud. Gary, what is Trinidad and Tobago's biggest environmental challenge?
That's the biggest question for the century. The challenges are so many, but in our view, it's a question of accountability and transparency, because if there is full accountability and we know what's going on, then at least we can begin to put together the building blocks. Last couple of months, in fact, we've had the threat of the Nabarima, which contained 1.25 million barrels of crude oil. And there's been so much information and misinformation that has continued to be spread that we went there ourselves. When we were there, we took images of the vessels that were there. To us today, this is the greatest threat because it's one that could be averted. All of the others that I've listed on my notes in preparation for today are ongoing environmental damage issues.
But Gary, if you had to ask, what is at the root of the Nabarima problem? Because you raised the issue of transparency, and I'm just wondering, is it that our systems and structures and processes are not robust enough? And if you can talk a little about that, how robust is it?
But clearly not enough. I mean, almost all of our legislation, almost all, save and except the Environmental Management Act, has an escape valve where a minister has the authority to overrule. So in the old world legislation, the authority of an appointed minister or an elected minister, more appropriately as it should be, is unquestionable. And this is probably at the root cause of our problems. And this is, had been debated at length, the whole question of constitutional reform. And yes, it does affect the environment, because unless the citizens can participate in a democratic process and a legislative process that is transparent, where there is inclusion, then it becomes governance by political paranoia. So in the instance of the Nabarima, we were told by the Venezuelan government, and the comments were repeated here by the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs, that the danger was not present and the vessel was safe. But yet when they sent a team over, they never showed us any imagery of the vessel at the angle that we had shown it, where it was listing. And when they showed us the footage, it's very questionable, because if a vessel is under 10 feet of water, all of the electrical instruments could not work. But we never got any definite verification that what we saw was in fact what FFOS took images of. And we were told most recently that the oil was being removed. And yet today we get a release on international press that ENI, the Italian partner, today announced that the US government has given them clearance that sanctions are lifted and that they are sending in a vessel to remove the oil. But the Maduro government told us a week ago that the oil was being removed.
But so, Gary, have you considered that maybe the government is acting on the information that they have and is acting in the best way that they could? Have you considered that?
Absolutely. I mean, Dr. Amory Brown, I consider him to be a personal friend and a person of the highest integrity inside and outside of politics. So there's no question in my mind that he was not telling the truth. But from the beginning, when we spoke to him, our insistence was that we should not be relying on third-party information on a situation of crisis. So we have listed a few things that we think are critical coming out of the Nabarima crisis, if it is as we hope that we will come out of it. And
I'm sure we're going to come out of it. So could you go through that list for me?
well, it's just simple points that we need to upgrade our agreements with all of our regional Caribbean Sea neighbors so that we should have real-time sharing of information. Our ministers of foreign affairs should not have to go through bureaucratic red tape to get real-time information firsthand. There should be no requirement of a diplomatic authorization. We, as a Caribbean Sea region, should share with our brothers and sisters openly and immediately. And this should be by an agreement, a Caribbean or an OAS or a CARICOM OAS agreement, and it should be endorsed at the highest international levels by the UN. If we don't have that, we'll continue to face more of the threats that we currently face, not just from the extractive sector, but we have global warming issues, climate change, sea level rise, the most amount of hurricanes in the history of the Caribbean. And the hurricanes are now going all the way on the western side of Florida and all the way up to Jacksonville. Yes. And all the way to 2 years ago in Portugal, they got hit by a hurricane.
So, Gary, one of the things you're saying is that we need some kind of information sharing platform that is open and transparent.
And more than that, as a region that stands together, we need to stand together and to share all of our resources. So we need to get together with the government, not only of Grenada and St. Vincent and Guyana, Suriname and Venezuela, but throughout the Caribbean, Barbados, Belize, the Bahamas, Suriname, Trinidad, Venezuela, Guyana, all of us are extracting oil and gas now. So if or any of us...
You're really talking about the entire, all the countries and islands which the Caribbean Sea washes. That's really what you're saying, that we need to come together and share the information, and it must be on a proactive basis rather than a reactive basis.
But if we all share the same body of sea, then it does not make sense that some of us have a strict diet of one type of diet and another type of diet. So throughout the Caribbean, we need to synchronize our legislation. Trinidad and Tobago and Belize probably have the only two areas that have at least some synchronization of the process of approval for new polluters and new applications. But the rest of the Caribbean and this region either have no legislation whatsoever or some stage of evolution of some type, and it doesn't coordinate to ensure the protection of our sea. So on the one hand, Trinidad and Tobago legislation is very critical of oil and gas or chemical industries. But in St. Vincent, the environmental legislation is almost non-existent.
So maybe a CARICOM approach might solve that problem.
Our recommendation to the head of CARICOM, who we are dispatching a letter on Monday, is that we need to include the United States, where there are some islands in our region that are US islands. We have Florida and part of Texas and so on the Caribbean Sea. There's all of Central America. And then we have the Dutch, English, French, and Spanish islands. And so it's a much more complicated than only CARICOM. But yes.
But Gary, sometimes you have to take incremental steps and begin where you can begin in order to make sure that you achieve your objective. So far we've talked about information sharing, and secondly, we've talked about legislation. What would be a third point that you would wish to raise that we ought to do in order to protect our environment a little better?
Today in Trinidad, in 2013, we got the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan, which basically is that all of the extractors and the government need to have an inventory of what they have. How can we help each other if there's an emergency in the oil and gas sector? We had made that proposal in 2002 in the Energy Conference because we had studied at that time the western seaboard of the United States and Canada, where there's a synchronized agreement to respond to an extractive industry emergency on that coast of the United States, because they're both extracting oil and gas on the western seaboard. So they have worked out the cohesiveness of that. And we had made that proposal, and 10 years later in Trinidad and Tobago, we now have such a plan. We are proposing as well that the entire CARICOM and Caribbean Sea region should come together and have a similar type of plan, because they are not just oil and gas emergencies. We have sargassum, which is accelerating and becoming of catastrophic proportions for our tourism sector, for our ecosystem. So there's more that we need to do. And outside of this immediate problem that we have with the Nabarima, we have other wider problems of waste management in general. We have problems of the extractive sector in general. And we have problems of development and new developments. So there's a whole scheme of challenges that we have ahead.
And Gary, you've raised a number of issues. What action the citizen sitting in their home looking at this interview, what action could that citizen take?
People are armchair observers. Trinidad and Tobago, everybody wants to sit back and relax and criticize. They'll criticize Pablo, Gary, Denise. And then if you get an award for your good work of a lifelong of selflessness and contributing, then everybody will clap you. So it's almost like a wait and see approach. We have to change that. My grandfather came from Syria. Your grandfather came from India. I'm not sure. We all come from somewhere, but I am firmly of the opinion, and I've promoted my whole life, that I came from here. This is my root. I am not comfortable in the Arabian world. I'm not comfortable in the Asian world. This is where I'm comfortable. And if people realize that we must embrace our land and our brothers and sisters, regardless of religion, of age, of race, of color of skin or eyes, at the end of the day, we are our brother's keeper. And I think there's some colonial remnant of being, we have inherited this disenfranchised approach towards our own region by people who are not from there. We are from here. So we must fight for the beverage containers bill. We must fight against landfills that are oozing toxic ooze into our marine areas, because landfills should never be in a mangrove.
Yes. Gary, you're very, very aggressive in your approach, and I understand your passion. And I really want you to reach out to the citizen, the person sitting at home and looking at this interview, and ask that person, what one action can they take to impact our environment so that we preserve the environment for our future generations? What's that one action they can take?
Read before you speak. Become knowledgeable, because knowledge is really the basis of our evolution. We can't just feel, but we have to feel based on what we know. We have to think based on the facts that we can pull together to come together. So there's no single action, but the genesis of our evolution and upliftment is based on knowledge. And sometimes a little bit of knowledge is more destructive than no knowledge at all. Many people, for instance, are not aware that the extractive sector, we are taking forestry out of our forests. We are putting taking water out of our aquifers. You have water bottling companies making billions of dollars and paying literally cents per cubic ton of water. And yet, when they take it out from the aquifer, they destroy our rivers and our streams because the water table falls. Yes. And as the water table falls, they've boasted, well, if it falls, we just go deeper.
Yeah.
But the impact it has on our farmers who depend on surface water, or our quarries which wash gravel, illegal and legal quarries, neither of which require environmental safeguards. So we have an environmental authority, but quarries don't need to apply, or those who were granted approval prior to the environmental authority or during the time when our two separate governments relaxed the environmental requirement and everybody applied for every type of quarry. Today, 10 years later, nobody needs to apply because they all got approval when it was easy going. So people need to know. You need to have knowledge. You can't just have passion. You need to
Yes.
inform yourself, read about it. I mean, we represent the fishery, but the fishery is so unregulated, it's a disgrace. So we have laws from 1917 that you cannot sell what we call the bait fish. Yet going to every market, even to high-low, you'll see them selling it, and it's against the law.
So,
So
Gary, on that note, I am sure we'll bring you back to talk about the fish. But on that note, that citizens ought to inform themselves, they ought to read, they ought to be more knowledgeable. Let us take an interest in our environment, but take that interest from the point of view of knowledge. Thank you very much for being part of Demming Chronicles. We'll be back shortly.
bye.
Welcome back to Demming Chronicles. And on set today we have Derrick Lewis. Derrick, what brings you joy?
A good book, good friends, stimulating conversations, and seeing people having a good time and being a part of it from a voyeur's perspective, having created it or having something to do with creating their good time. That's what I consider to be things I enjoy.
And you know, in a way that defines this big word that we have called Carnival. Are you looking forward to Carnival 2021?
Well, I'm looking forward to an evolution, a revolution, or some type of approach that I think is would give us some one-upmanship on the world.
And are you part of that drive to give us that one-upmanship?
Well, symbolically, yes. Practically, yes, to a certain extent. I want to do things that would impact in some type of profound way. So instead of jumping in the fight, I'm waiting to see who needs to be around the table, or trying to create an environment where the right people are around the table. Because at present, we're fighting an invisible enemy, COVID, and we are fighting against the system and the health systems, and we're fighting, well, I say fighting, the dialogue is not really fighting. I'd say the dialogue is multiple stories being told, multiple approaches being made, from different angles, with different interests, with different perspectives. So, and each of the approaches are valid. I'm not saying that any one of them is not valid. It's just that I think for anything to happen, we need to have the right group of people around one table, or many groups of people, then to sift or to bring it down to the right people, or the people who could make change, or who can impact change, or who can facilitate change, around the table at the same time.
I am anxious, Derrick, that Trinidad has said that we're not having Carnival 2021.
Yeah.
And I am anxious that, having made that statement, our historical Carnival days will pass and there will be nothing that plants a flag that says Trinidad continues to be the Mecca of Carnival. And I'm anxious that we're losing the time. How about you?
We are losing the time, but again, we can waste a lot of time if we speculate and we speak into voids and speak to an emotional and unbalanced set of terms. So we don't need a lot of time to create a festival. We are good at that. We need a lot of time to create an evolutionary or revolutionary carnival experience. At the start of this, Denise, you said that Trinidad has said that we're not having a carnival. Could you kind of like
Okay,
tell me
I'm just
when you said Trinidad has said, what do you mean?
I'm quoting that the government has said that there will not be Carnival 2021.
Right, so the government of Trinidad and Tobago. What has Trinidad said?
I think that Trinidad continues to say, we're not sure. We're trying things because in different spaces, you are having different conversations. And actually, people are beginning to stage different activities. So there's a difference in the voice between the governance voice and the voice of the people. You know, and to me, that's where the conversation has to happen. You know,
you need two willing parties to have a conversation.
So, Derrick, what are we going to do?
I don't have the answer. I actually have gotten together with a group of people and a learning institution to see if we can get the right people around the table. And out of that conversation, if we get those right people around the table, we can actually start doing, based on the time, start actually moving in synergy, in a very cohesive way towards something. What that is and what could happen would be based on the skills, abilities, and time frames that we're working in. But what I'm saying is that, okay, let's be more practical, Denise. You're a woman of straight talk. I will not have a conversation if the Ministry of Health is not in it.
Yeah.
I would not have a conversation on, when I say I would not have a conversation, I will not try to have a conclusive or meaningful conversation if the Ministry of Health is not on the table, if the police is not on the table, Minister of National Security or someone representing significant actions from the Ministry of National Security. I wouldn't also the Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of Tourism, which are one and the same. No, Ministry of Trade, and the traditional band leaders, the new or evolved band leaders that are, there, whichever category you'd like to call them, to have them, and all of the stakeholders, the Juve band, leadership, the Promoters Association, the restaurateurs, the hoteliers. So if you have, my hope is that we can get the head of the Hotels Association, and the head of the bands, and the head of the police, and the Ministry of Health around the table, and that is what was needed. I'd love to speak then.
You have just listed a number of organizations, and to me, there are just about two ways that could happen. Either by a call from the Prime Minister, and then it will happen, or a call from someone else who has the power and the authority and the clout to bring these people around the table. Because these people, if Derrick Lewis called it, do you think they will respond?
No, no, because there's no value proposition to what Derrick Lewis represents.
Except that Derrick Lewis has had a tremendous history of transforming the carnival. And here's an opportunity for a Derrick Lewis, and I'm not saying you, but for a Derrick Lewis, to have a different conversation so that Carnival 2021 happens in some way, shape, or form.
I agree, but why? Meaning, Why do it? Why if the approach is as if you're thinking about Carnival, forget about it. Why? What do I represent, or someone like myself represent? What do we represent? We have to have a value proposition, Denise. There's no value proposition for what I represent. So I'm like a piece of glass, but I'm a diamond. I am a piece of glass that looks shiny and pretty, and I might be a Moko Jambi or a fancy sailor or a BBF, But
Yeah.
I am not valued in the system of values, So without having a value, you can't be invited to the table. You don't ask to be at the table. You're usually invited to the table. It's said in the good book.
Yes,
So
Derrick.
only when we understand, and I think to a great extent, the stone that the builder refused could be our head cornerstone. And this entertainment industry is the stone that the builder is refusing.
Derrick, on that note, can you just give me one key message, if you had to give us a message of hope about Carnival 2021? I take on board that cornerstone and the stone that the builder rejected. Can you just give us one pearl, something that will bring us joy tomorrow morning and say, yes, that's the joy I got from Derrick Lewis?
I look forward to the day when we make the needed investments in our infrastructure for the arts, our infrastructure for entertainment, our infrastructure to showcase who we really are.
And on that note, we bring this interview to a wrap, that we need to do the investment. And what you're really talking about is investment in our people. Demming Chronicles. We'll be back with you shortly. This was Demming Chronicles, and in this edition, we spoke to Gary Aboud and to Derrick Lewis. Next edition, we'll be continuing to discuss the ideas that make a difference to our country. We'll be discussing how to ensure that our country changes the conversation. Until next time, Demming Chronicles. Be safe.